This is the Master Marketer Show, powered by Proofpoint Marketing. Each week, we explore the mindsets, skill sets, and tool sets the top B2B marketers use to drive results. Gain actionable insights, one masterful, revenue-generating success story at a time. Let's get started.
Everybody, welcome back to the Master Marketer Show. We got an exciting episode for you all today. We've got Winona Rajamohan today with us from SmartCar. She's the content marketing manager, and obviously we're going to be talking about content. And specifically, kind of set the stage a little bit, we're going to be talking about content repurposing. So really, what we often see is people are doing maybe webinars over here, they're doing their social over there, they're doing events separately, everything is kind of siloed, and they all sort of live as standalone assets, which is kind of a waste of resources, honestly. And I know you guys are doing some really cool things with webinars specifically. We'll focus some stuff there, but really it's how do we make the most out of the content that we create. So Winona, welcome to the show, and why don't we start there?
Right. Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here. But yeah, as you mentioned, content repurposing, for us specifically, it's a very critical part of our content strategy, in a way that when we think of content being a machine that's pretty economical. It's reusable. It's something that can always be whittled down into a short form piece. It's something that can be expanded into a long form piece. And when I create, my blogs as well, or whether it's ebooks, white papers, I always think about is it webinar material? Is it something where, I can talk about it and discuss about it on a webinar and have the audience engage and let me know their thoughts? Can we invite partners to talk about this specific topic as well? I think that's really the main driver. How great is it? How interesting is it? Is it conversation worthy? I think that's something important to think about when you're writing anything, really.
I love that mindset, and we're going to talk about mindset, skill sets, tool sets, results, and that's a great place for us to start right there. That mindset that you have around content, because I think that oftentimes just the collective marketers out there in the world, we think about, oh my gosh, we have to write this content, put it out there, and then go on to the next thing, right? And we're kind of constantly feeding this content machine, this very hungry content machine or monster that constantly needs new content. And what we often forget, and I know that I am guilty of this myself in my own content efforts on LinkedIn and just in general, is okay, well, you know what? We don't just have to write it and then forget about it and then move on to the next thing. We can write it, develop it, create it, and see how it can live on in multiple different ways, shapes, forms. So I absolutely love that mindset that you have around content. Mike, did you looked like you were going to jump in and say something?
I was going to go to, speaking of the content machine, obviously a machine needs an engine. So maybe talk about, how do you think about, what is your mindset around creating that content engine?
Yeah, of course. As a content team of one, pretty much at the moment, writing for, this niche. It's a very interesting niche. We are a developer platform for app developers creating, apps in the mobility space. So we're talking about like car sharing, EV demand response, car rentals, auto insurance. It's a very interesting topic. It can get pretty technical as well. And it's something that, you can't focus on pumping out, simple bare bones kind of content that targets high volume keywords because, it's very specific. You want to reach the right audience here. So ideally, if I target these high volume keywords, the high intent traffic isn't exactly there. So when I think about content, I really create content that tells a story, our story. Everything has to tie into our overarching mission, which is to empower developers in this space. I start by answering questions at all times. What do our audience need to know? Like, what do they need to know? Can I show them, how people like them are solving hard problems using our software? I found that personally with that approach, it becomes much more natural to kind of leverage SEO and tie that into, the future webinar ideas. You're not grasping at straws to make a piece work. You're not grasping at straws to kind of tie it into a webinar a couple months down the line. So I think just having a very intentional, big picture look at content right from the get-go, when you're building your content calendar, when you're building your strategy, I think that's super important. That's the main thing that I focus on for sure.
So webinars are obviously, it sounds like based on what you're describing, are at the center of everything you're talking. You mentioned, as you're creating a blog post or whatnot, you're even thinking, is this potentially webinar worthy? Is this something we can have a webinar around? Maybe talk about that a little bit more. Sort of, why are webinars at the center of everything?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's exactly the center, but it is a great way to kind of get more engagement for content. We have someone that's really awesome on the team who focuses on webinars, and I work very closely with her. So when I do come up with a content topic, the webinar doesn't come immediately down the line, but it's something that I like to build up to. One topic, like let's say EV charging, you can't cover EV charging in one single blog. So when I build that, that tree, so to say, of blogs that are going to stem from that, maybe there are 3 or 4, I kind of center that around a customer story, a case study that really supports that and tells these different elements. And then a couple months down the line, we invite this customer for a webinar and then support that customer with, the different blogs that we've written that features their story, that features their success, that features their brand. And that entices them to kind of come on board and be a part of it. So I think that's one really exciting thing that we've got to build, we've got to experience. So yeah, I think it all works hand in hand, having that really close coordination, that really close communication with other members of the marketing team, creating content that lasts a long time, economical, tying it into that big picture, I think is really where, it's easy to forget when you're writing and when you're targeting keywords and stuff like that. So I think always having that something else to keep you in check, someone else to keep you in check as well on the team.
What we have often found, especially in very niche industries or, organizations, is that the content marketer's job is to, yes, develop the content, put it out there, repurpose it, but most importantly, it's to work with your internal SMEs. And oftentimes that also means maybe getting buy-in from exec team or higher ups to be able to get access to those SMEs that are working on whatever it is, the product, that the software, what have you. What do you believe the mindset is that you need to have as a as a content marketer to be able to go internally to your team, get the buy-in, work with your colleagues that are maybe not marketers, maybe don't have a lot of understanding of content marketing, and that might come to you and say, well, gosh, Winona, I'm so busy. I don't have time for this article. Can you just go figure this out? What is that mindset that you think content marketers today need to have, especially in very niche industries?
Yeah, no, I love that you brought that up. I think when it comes to niche industries, it's important that the content marketer can't do everything by themselves. They're not necessarily the expert in a niche kind of space. So you have to depend on the internal SMEs, even external SMEs. You need to be able to kind of know what your proposal is as you're asking for advice, as you're asking for, quotes, as you're asking for guidance to write that piece of content, right? And for me, I went to school for journalism. So when it comes to creating content, I'm guided by very, very journalistic principles where, it's not a story. It's not a strong story without evidence, without a source that you can speak to. And you kind of lose your reader if you're not giving them a strong lead within those first few lines. And they want to hear from someone that's an expert. That's your strong lead, right? And so it needs to be hyper relevant. And so when I'm blessed that at Smart Car, we do have a very sort of content focused approach where there is buy-in for content from the top down. Everyone is very focused on empowering developers through these stories, and they learn by example. So when I go to, let's say, someone on the engineering team or the customer success team, with a topic that I have at hand, I make it very clear to be super organized, to show them exactly what I'm trying to achieve with this piece of content, show them why it's newsworthy, I guess, in journalistic terms. And there are a few elements in the newsroom, which I think applies to content marketing when I do build my case for these kind of topics. So showing how timely it is. And that definitely helps them kind of see why they need to prioritize this in the first place. Proximity is one thing that you talk about in the newsroom, and that's more for like location. But I guess in a content marketing stand, it's how close you are to something that, your readers or your customers are doing daily. Is it a daily routine? Is it a daily procedure? Is it a daily problem? There's the importance and the impact that you kind of have to spell out for your internal and external SMEs as well. Does it matter enough to people? Or like how exactly does it relate to the people that we're helping? How exactly does it relate to the internal SMEs themselves? How are we empowering them? And then most importantly, the human interest, which I think is something that, besides the content team, everyone, the marketing team, executives, I think everyone needs to have a collective kind of understanding of how human interest is so important in marketing stories and content marketing stories. Especially in B2B software, you need to make it compelling with some sort of a humanizing element, or else you're just kind of reading like a technical document at that point. So I think that's something that I always try to spell out for, any internal SME, any external source that I'm talking to. How can I make it, really exciting in a way where it's not just like, typical content marketing, SEO kind of stuff. It's more, it's really a story that empowers the reader, empowers the employees, it empowers the people that you're inviting to kind of make your content better as well. I think that's an important way to look at it.
You can see us nodding along because, we've talked to a number of other content marketing leaders before, and pretty much across the board, the mindset that comes across that's needed is this journalistic mindset that you described. Mm-hmm. You're the first one that sort of mentioned a couple of these things around proximity and human interest, which I think maybe is a good transition for us to talk skill sets specifically in terms of...
Before we do that, Mike, I do have one other mindset question, if it's okay. All right.
Mindset
before we go to skill set, one other mindset question, and then we'll move on to skill set. I agree with Mike. I love some of these things that you're talking about in terms of journalistic mindset and how you're approaching your SMEs. You mentioned early on that you feel very blessed to work at SmartCar because you have a leadership team that is really bought into this idea of content marketing and empowering the team through relevant stories and storytelling. Oftentimes in the B2B space, maybe not so much in SaaS, but in other B2B industries, there is a lack of understanding around storytelling and the value that it can bring to marketing and even to sales at the end of the day. And just content marketing in general is sort of seen as like, oh, well, we don't need to do that. We just need to focus on sales. We just need to focus on this, that, the other, what have you. My question to you is, what of your, pulling from the examples of your executive team, your leadership team, what do you believe the mindset they have that would be relevant to people in, leaders in the B2B space when it comes to storytelling and taking a journalistic approach to content marketing? So what have you seen that others in the B2B space can really benefit from in terms of mindset?
Yeah, for sure. That's an interesting question. And I think, it's a mindset that it's very hard to be like, okay, like this is the mindset that you should have. But I think from a very big picture approach, I think a lot of B2B companies now are realizing how difficult it is to get the engagement that they used to get, whether that's engagement on the blog, engagement on socials, just overall conversations in online spaces. Everyone's trying to build a community as well. And not all niches have that kind of, very active community online. So I think everyone's trying to find a way to sort of differentiate themselves. And I think one narrative that's been coming out of that is, that idea of being relatable, being a company that's relatable, being a company that actually gives you direct information without kind of bringing you through a twist of like jargon and, really over expansive, written work, like 10-page white papers to describe like a single topic. That's not what B2B is anymore. And I think storytelling is kind of, it's a quicker way to explain something very expansive. You're not just explaining how your product works, you're explaining the benefit, you're painting a picture of, what customers have achieved. And at the same time, you're grabbing their attention for more than 5 seconds, so that they're not kind of jumping off the page. And I think a lot of executives right now, like I'm seeing like on LinkedIn and on Twitter and things like that, people are starting to embrace that idea of, storytelling as a very key form of marketing. And I think as a content marketer, that's kind of where you need to drill the importance. I guess if you get pushback on, why should I invest on something that doesn't, outright put a bunch of CTAs right from the get-go? Why do I need to have my readers read this story, so to say? I think it's important to kind of show how, maybe show them the proof. For me, I've personally found that, when I can show them how, traffic differs on something a little bit more exciting versus a little bit more of a bare bones blog, or how the time on page differs, or how the bounce rate differs, that's a great way to kind of ease them into the topic a little bit. Because sometimes, people don't sort of believe you on the get-go with storytelling. But I think showing examples too is another important way, showing examples of other executives who have sort of taken the same approach, other companies. Examples, I think, are a content marketer's best friend because there are so many great ideas out there. Everyone's embracing content that I think now more than ever, it's a little bit easier to make an argument to your boss as opposed to how it was a couple years ago. But yeah, that it's not an easy thing to do, I must say, which is why I feel like there needs to be some sort of element that's backed to results. If you can't show expansive results right away, show them something smaller, from a very small level, like you said, time on page, bounce rate, something tangible that they can look at and sort of take that chance.
So yeah, we'll generally talk about proof. Things like. Yeah, we'll generally look at things like content consumption as at the very top level, right? Because that's a good proxy for, hey, this is more likely to work at least.
Yes.
Right. Because if they're not consuming, then it really isn't having an impact. If all they do is come to the page and bounce, or come to the page and stay for 10 seconds, or watch 3 seconds of the video, who cares? Versus, hey, we're telling stories and we're getting 3x, 4x, 5x more consumption, whatever that is for the medium, that starts telling that story. One thing that I think I want to dive into is we've mentioned, we said the word storytelling a bunch of times, and what I see happening out there, what my concern is, storytelling has become almost like a buzzword. It's not to you, obviously, from what we're talking about. So what I'd love to hear from you is what does storytelling in B2B, what does that mean to you? And maybe if you can provide some examples in terms of what does that look like? Because what I see often is people thinking that storytelling really means one thing. All of a sudden, it's like everybody feels like they need to be funny as a brand. And it's like, we have to create humor content. It's like, well, no, that's not for everybody. So what does storytelling mean to you? And maybe provide some examples of how you've done it.
Yeah, of course. I agree. Storytelling has become a little bit of a buzzword. I know when I was doing journalism, storytelling meant something completely different. And now that I'm in B2B, I hear it a lot more than I did when I was in the journalism space. But yeah, I agree that I think there are many different ways to storytell, right? I think when it comes to the humor and things like that, you see a lot of storytelling for, storytelling about the brand itself. I think that's something different. I think the storytelling that I really focus on is storytelling about the customer. And I guess for me, storytelling kind of goes hand in hand with just really good customer research. Because, really good customer stories, I think that's our strongest form of storytelling. That's a storytelling that really lasts the most. It's the most economical. It can be repurposed a lot more. It makes the most sense. It's always going to be relevant, 6 months down the line, it's always going to be tied down to to your mission and what you can really offer people. So that's where storytelling is kind of centered around for me. How can I get the best story out of my customers? How can I make them feel comfortable? If it's humor, even, how can I impart humor in a way where, it makes them comfortable to kind of share their anecdotes with me, share their funny stories about how they found our software and how they made a couple mistakes down the way, but now they're super familiar with how we work and now they're doing great things. I think that's what great stories are for me. Something that really shows how a problem is being solved. And I think that definition sometimes gets lost because, like you said, everything's a story, right? So I think when a content marketer says, I want storytelling to be, the kind of the pinnacle of our strategy here, it's like, what kind of story? Like, who is the main character of your story, and what kind of fairy tale ending are you trying to get to there? Yeah.
You mentioned that the definition of storytelling was maybe different when you were in your journalism days than it is right now in B2B marketing. Talk a little bit about that. What are the maybe differences and similarities, and where do you see? Let's start there. What are the differences and similarities between those two?
Yeah, I guess they're pretty similar. I feel like people in B2B space say storytelling just a lot more frequently. I feel like I see it a lot in Twitter threads and LinkedIn threads and all sorts of things. Storytelling, when I was writing for the school paper and doing all these journalistic projects, I think it was really a process. It was a process of kind of figuring out how you can elevate your sources in the story, how you can elevate your sources in the story and tie that into something that's important for the community. That's what a good story was for us. And for me, when I did storytelling, I always thought about other supporting elements as well. How will it look like on the page? If it was a print edition, how can I take a picture of this event in a way that captures some of the quotes that I'm talking about? How can I get the right quotes to make this story flow so that people keep reading this newspaper? So I think that's when it comes to writing content, even though you're not necessarily taking a picture or on the field most of the time. Sometimes you're just stuck behind a Zoom call, trying to get the most out of a 30-minute quick meeting with a customer, and you're really trying to capture those quotes, but maybe they're not giving you those quotes, that kind of thing. So I think just being really resourceful in that way, I think that's what storytelling has always been, and I try to capture that as much as I can, even though it's a little bit different, but trying to be as resourceful as possible, trying to look at things from many different angles and not panicking if it doesn't work, and being able to say like, okay, I'm wrong. I think I need to pivot from this initial story outline and do something a little bit different. I think that's what it was in journalism, and that's what content marketers should embrace a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we're kind of coming.
We're just segueing perfectly into skill sets, actually.
Coming full circle.
Yes.
Exactly. So
I was gonna say, or sorry, Mike. Let me jump in here quickly. We've talked a lot about storytelling, which I love because this is a first of the topic that we've really dived into on this show, and you've provided us and our listeners with some really beautiful examples of what that is and what that should look like, and how you should change your mindset if it isn't working. We talked about storytelling. We talked about content repurposing. So let's talk right now a little bit about the skill sets. You've shared a lot about your journalistic background and how that has leveraged into B2B marketing, especially content marketing. I'd love to know a little bit more about what you believe are the skill sets necessary for the type of work that you do, and more specifically to the case study that you've been presenting us throughout our journey here on the call.
Yeah, definitely. I think the first, the most important skill set, it can be pretty vague, but for me, it's about getting customer research done right. And when I say done right, it's being very intentional with the questions that you're asking and really getting nitty gritty. It's not just about what did you achieve with us, but being very involved and interested in their entire story. From the very get-go, how did they think about the problem? What was their mission going into this search for, your software or your service? What was their aha moment that led them to you? What was their aha moment on the sales call even that, kind of made them be like, what, I want this thing. I want to be a part of this journey. I think that's a very important part of customer research. It's not just about what you're getting at the end, but it's the whole process, because you get lots of nice little bite-sized, golden moments in, a customer interview that you don't typically get at the end. These are just kind of very spontaneous moments that, a customer sort of blurts out, and then you kind of dive in deeper. So I think that's very important. Getting customer research done right by, really setting a good amount of questions and being willing to, I guess, to ask questions along the way as well, to stray a little bit from your initial template even, and ask questions that are, very humanizing, that are, not so scripted, a little bit focused more on the meat of the topic. I think that's a great way to do that. So at my previous company as well, as a recruitment software company, so I built the content and webinar program there. And at some point I ended up managing community as well, because they were a very important part of our content development efforts. And these were like a community of customers and early users who had a lot of experience in the industry. And so that's where I really learned how to get these questions done right? If I'm on calls every single day, you can't just use the same set of questions constantly and expect the results to be really great. So I think my biggest weapon at that point was, relationship building with these customers, asking for permission to use these great quotes and anecdotes, not just for this particular case study, but other content as well, giving them credit for it, showcasing them as a subject matter expert. So in that case, after one single customer interview, I'm not just completing one case study, I've got something valuable that can inform the next 5 pieces of content. And when I need help down the future, some expert insight, I can easily reach back out to these people and get even more proof, if they have the time to sit down with me for an extra 5 minutes. So I think that's a really important skill, knowing how to interview, knowing how to ask the right questions, knowing how to be a good listener too, so that people can give you what you need for your story.
So you talked earlier about proximity and human interest, and you just talked about you mentioned asking humanizing questions. Maybe talk a little bit more about that. What does that look like? And maybe I don't know if you can give some examples of the types of questions you ask to make that happen.
Yeah, sure. Let me try to recall a little bit. So the questions that that I like to ask, it typically focuses on, like I mentioned, what was that aha moment, right? Or I like to start off with, what is your mission? What's your mission? What did you get into this industry trying to do? What were you trying to do? And what was that missing link? What was that missing link in the process of you trying to reach this mission? And how did, that sort of question lead to finding us? I like to hear also about just their whole journey of how they found us in the first place. Was, of course, what channel did they use? But more importantly, what was the driving factors that really made them realize that, I do want to schedule this meeting. Not just a very, I like to tap into kind of the emotions of that as well. Was it something urgent? Why did they feel that urgency to kind of book that meeting? And then when they found us, what exactly were the drivers that made them realize that, okay, this is something that I want to invest in. And sometimes you realize it's not necessarily okay, the product fits exactly what I'm looking for. Sometimes it's the team, it's the team that felt welcoming. Sometimes it's the patience that the team shows throughout the sales cycle as well. It's very important things that you can sort of dive into a little bit. And it helps you understand the customer a lot more in that niche as well. You might realize that, maybe customers in this industry need a longer sales cycle. They need longer time to be convinced. And that helps you kind of articulate the next few questions. Those are some of my few favorites. I tend to come up with questions a lot on the whim as well, just because customers give so many good little nuggets of information. But I hope that answers the question a little bit. I hope that was a little specific enough.
Yeah, no, that was good. I'd love to hear you describe your process in terms of how do you connect the dots between, topic selection and customer research and case study creation and then webinars. Like, if you can paint that picture for us.
Yeah, I'm a big system person. So I like to create systems that really keep me organized. So I have for me, I like to keep it simple and use a bunch of docs that really outline my thought process from A to Z. And I think, content that's economical, content that, can last a long amount of time, it needs clear motivations, a strategy that really has purpose and the right intentions, whether, the creation of your briefs, from the way you plan distribution, how you measure success, how you revisit blogs for internal linking and technical SEO refreshments. There needs to be a system, and it's really for your own sanity so that when you do want to repurpose something, you know exactly what you're going to leverage, what angles have already been used, what angles you need to tap into, the best channels to use, the improvements you need to make. It can be something as simple as a giant spreadsheet that lists down, all the content that you've already created, what categories they're in, what, stage of the funnel, if you're kind of, using that as a measure of how to repurpose content. And I like to put little notes into each piece of my content as well in terms of like what's been covered, what hasn't been covered. And, from the get-go, when I create something, like I mentioned, I always think first, what are the distribution channels that can be used for content, not at the end, but at the very beginning, right? And that kind of gives me an idea of what I can tap into a couple months down the line when it's time to revisit this topic again. Good hack for me is just always categorizing everything too. Like I have a category for pretty much everything. Lots of little like colors and tabs in this giant Google spreadsheet. But yeah, creating a system, I think that's the most important because it's a lot of moving pieces. I think people tend to forget how many moving pieces there are in a content machine. It really is a machine. There's a lot of different parts to fuel. And when you if you can't kind of be organized and answer your own questions yourself, then no one else is really going to have the insight to answer those questions for you. And I learned that the hard way. So,
yeah. So
you mentioned you have a lot of categories. How do you categorize your content? What do you use? Like, what does your matrix look like? Let's just say.
Yeah, so I have the basics, I have the content type, of course, and then I like to do I use a little dollar sign. So I have like a $1 sign, a $2 sign, kind of like Yelp in a way. But I kind of put that to each of my content pieces to kind of see what has the most potential to be repurposed. Now, some topics are not as extensive as others. So maybe there's something very simple, maybe a short little update or something like that gets a $1 sign. And then, I may not have the bandwidth to expand into like a huge 3-set guide at this point in time, but it may be timely for something right now. Like I just wrote a piece about electricity blackouts because it's summer, and that has a lot to do with EV charging demand response. So that has a $3 sign because that's a topic that will continuously grow. And so I put that in there because I know a couple months down the line, I do want to check how blackouts have gone in the summer 2 months from now. And maybe there's a little update that I can add into that report. So that's my little hack. And then I also have categories for, have I done internal linking for this or not? So internal linking, yes, no, things like that. And also, I have a tag for, is this something that I should reach out to a customer to? Is there a customer that I can turn to kind of develop this into a more specific case study about a particular problem that's been covered in this blog? Lots of little things like that.
I love these tips, and I love the dollar sign. That is something that I've never heard of or seen myself. I come from a content marketing background, although it's been quite a few years since I've executed a content plan at this point, running an agency. So I love that. That's brilliant. And it's so clever and just so, easy to see, right? I mean, $1 sign means like, hey, one and done. We did this topic. There's really not a lot of legs on here. We're not going to take this further. you know, you're my cheapie $1. But like $2, $3, $4 means, wow, okay, we really need to revisit. There's a lot of legs here. There's a lot of opportunity for us to do a lot more things, whether it's repurposing into a video testimonial or a customer testimonial or a case study, you know, and vice versa. Bottom line, let's round out this discussion on skill sets, because you've shared so many valuable details here. But speaking directly to, let's say you're speaking directly to a counterpart in content marketing, or even let's say a leader in another company, what do you believe are the most important skill sets that content marketers need to have today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very big question. I think when it comes to that, I think of two things. There's, you know, ideation, having really good ideas. That's a very important thing. And another one is distribution, which I think is probably the toughest thing in content marketing at the moment. And when it comes to ideation, I think it's not just about having good ideas. It's about being really resourceful with your ideas as well. Because a good story isn't going to fall into your lap, right? And it's not always going to be given to you by a keyword research tool. That's a guide. Content that can be repurposed is content that's really interesting and it ties into your big picture and it's in your mission. And those stories really need to be found. Like, you need to carve out some time each and every week to really look for those, you know, golden nuggets. You have to really dig for it in, you know, sales conversations, internal communication channels, ask internal experts and take notes. Even when you're on like a 15-minute call with them, just have your notebook there. Reach out to external experts, you know, those in your network. And even those who are completely unaware of who you are. That's an opportunity to always learn something new and question your own outline. And being resourceful in terms of testing how strong your content brief is, testing how strong your outline is. I mentioned this earlier, not being afraid to change your initial stance, you know, and being able to walk away from a story that is not going to work, even though you've put a lot of thought into that outline. You know, sometimes things change. You know, it has to really be focused on the business goal at the end of it. And sometimes that great idea may not be relevant to the business goal of this week, of this month. You know, it's very fluid, and your content calendar needs to be fluid as well. So being resourceful, having that swipe file of ideas, having that swipe file of, you know, important points that were talked about during meetings, syncs, you know, stand-ups, things like that. That's very important. And the other thing is distribution. I think a lot of content marketers have talked about distribution. But I think it's something that should be echoed time and time again, right? I think we're all trying to figure it out in this landscape. But right from the get-go, you know, optimizing for the channel you want to distribute in before you even get started. It makes it easier to tie value in a way that's relevant to your audience when you're crafting that email pitch or that newsletter copy or that social copy. You know, you need to have a hook, line, and sinker for each of those right from the get-go. So like what we did with that case study, you know, I knew there was big potential for it to be spun off in a lot of different directions. You know, there were a lot of anecdotes that I could highlight in other blogs. So I made note of that right at the top of my content brief. You know, ways to turn the webinar highlights into social media snippets and drive traffic back to that case study 2 months later so that it's consistently giving you traffic. I think being able to pull the pieces together like that and making note of it, because lots of good ideas just pop up as you're writing, right? Just making that doc really be your safe space for all your ideas, and keeping it, you know, very focused on each and every project. That's always a great skill to have.
So just to paraphrase what you're saying, so really it's having that journalistic mindset, being a good detective, being organized.
Yes.
You know, having a system to categorize and systematize your content, and then also really being a good listener, because you have to be able to listen to just about every stakeholder in and outside the organization to really find that golden nugget. And it's being a pirate also, right? Not being afraid to keep going and finding and digging and taking your map out, and if this direction didn't work, then we got to go in a different direction, or maybe take a little boat or take a swim or whatever it is, right, to get to that golden treasure. I love that. You've shared some really, really awesome insight into the mindset and the skill set of being a modern content marketer today.
Speaking of being a pirate, you mentioned swipe file.
I love that analogy. Myself that now, content pirate.
Yes.
You mentioned swipe file. Obviously, there's tools for that. And like, what are the tools that you use on a daily basis to make your team of one content machine work?
Yeah. So you mentioned swipe file. A lot of my swipe file is pretty much in Notion. So I have Notion for that just because it's nice to kind of put the emojis and the images in there in a place that's really neat. But big Notion fan. That's where I have a lot of my strategy docs in there as well, where I like to draft things out. So I use Notion more as a drafting tool, and then I move things over to Google Docs where I kind of share it with the rest of the team. In terms of other tools, there's, the usual Google Analytics, Google Search Console, big ones that I am always in and out of on a daily basis. Sometimes hourly. I'm trying to not check it as much, but, bad habit. I am a big Canva person. I think, as a content team of one, thinking of distribution and being in charge of distribution, we're in an age where, people need visuals. People need visuals in the blog. People need visuals on social media. So I spend a lot of time in Canva too, just trying to figure out interesting ways to make great designs. Because, sometimes you can't just depend on your in-house designer consistently. They have other things to do as well. And you really don't want any bottlenecks, just for a social media image. So kind of having that skill set on your own. I like making GIFs on Canva. I think that those are really fun. And those
you're going to have to teach me how to do that. That's cool.
Yes, I make a lot of GIFs on Canva for everyone. I feel like I've become like the GIF person in the company too, just because I make GIFs so quickly. But yeah, like just to promote case studies even, I like doing GIFs of like screenshots of our customers' apps and things like that. That always drives a lot more engagement. I use SparkToro a little bit here and there, especially when I'm doing pitches to newsletters and pitches to publications and podcasts and things like that. Or I use SparkToro when I'm trying to get subject matter experts for like pieces that I'm writing on. So that's always really fun. And then I use a research tool called Heyday. It's a Chrome extension. And because I'm doing a lot of research on a lot of different areas, the car sharing and EV charging, it's very hard to kind of categorize all that in Notion. Sometimes it's a lot. So I have Heyday to kind of remember all my research for me. So it's a tool where you kind of type it out. If you type something in Google called like car sharing, for example, it actually pulls out all the recent car sharing articles that you've read. If you search for the exact same thing before, which is, as a content marketer that's always in and out of research, sometimes I forget that I've researched something like an hour ago and I'm typing in the same exact keyword a couple hours later to look for that article. So this kind of helps me remember everything that I've read, and I can categorize things into different categories and like highlights and folders and stuff. So it's been a really cool tool to use.
That is clever. I've not heard of that one before. And
I haven't either, but I just looked it up and bookmarked
it.
Yeah.
I wish they had something like that for LinkedIn, because I see I was just trying to search for a post today that I had commented on, maybe months ago. And I was like, oh my God, this post is exactly what I want to share with my team about something that we were talking about. And I cannot find it for the life of me. And it's driving me crazy. But that is a super slick tool and one that I have not heard of. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Well, we've talked mindsets, we've talked skill sets, we've definitely talked tool sets. Now it's time to talk results. So Winona, tell us a little bit about, early on in the very beginning of the conversation, we talked about your case study, which was a customer story that you then repurposed into a webinar. So tell us, what were some of the results? What did you learn? What were your metrics for success? And what did it generate? Leads, closed won deals, pipeline. Tell us a little bit about that experience that you shared with us from the beginning.
Yeah, happy to share some sort of high level results on that. So Like we mentioned, content kind of elevates a lot of the other elements on the website. That webinar did really well, and we were able to kind of create a really strong promotion plan for that webinar because there was a case study already talking about this specific customer. So we kind of like built a little sequence of, it starts off with this case study. We're going to talk more about this at this upcoming webinar that's coming up next month. We had a lot more ammo for our email blasts as well, because there was, it wasn't just like a company name. There was actual content to kind of back up who this company was and what exactly they were doing. And it became, a really big webinar, our biggest webinar at that point to date. And, we were driving, traffic increased for sure, but we were also driving a lot of traffic to our key product pages from that case study. Equipping our nurture journeys with, really powerful content and a lot of the industry specific journeys as well. So that was really great. And, that case study in particular is performing, 50% better than all the other ones because we have a system for, internal linking and webinar repurposing. And we've noticed a big loop of traffic, really, case study to webinar recap, back to case study, back to this, back to that. So that's been really amazing to see. And I think it's a real testament to that idea of, really having that big picture, and that it pays off in the long run. It may not be, like I said, a webinar today or tomorrow, but, it's something that can really be developed into something bigger in the future. So that gave us a lot of lessons in terms of how to think about these big topics as well.
And were you able to connect any of this to your pipeline data?
Yeah. Not able to kind of share that, so to say.
Fair enough.
But yeah. But for sure, we had a lot of great conversations with really high intent people from that webinar. I think it was the most that we had ever seen. I think it was really amazing to see how much context we were able to give throughout the event promotion period and in the event itself. And since we're able to kind of give sort of collateral, at the end of the webinar as well in the form of this case study, we saw a lot of people really respond to the post email, the post webinar journeys as well. And yeah, got some great meetings booked, which is always amazing, to really see that kind of payoff. So yeah.
Yeah, well, and I love that you called it high intent conversations, because I think that's, we talk about high intent traffic, high intent leads, etc. But those high intent conversations, I think it's a good way to describe what we're trying to achieve, at least at the front end, if you will, of pipeline.
Yeah, and that's something that's a little bit like it's measurable. The content journey, the buying journey is so all over the place today. It's very hard to kind of track, who went where, who came in where, who came out where. But you can measure a good conversation qualitatively, and I think that's where a content marketer can really sort of build their business case for an executive and be like, I gave you great support for this really good conversation. I gave you context for this conversation. And I think that's an awesome thing to leverage.
Wow. Amazing. So in Yelp reviews system, your $, what was the $ assigned to the topic of the case study and the webinar that you did? Was that like a $2, a $3 piece of content?
Yeah, that was an interesting one. So I did that case study, a couple months after joining SmartCar. So initially I had like a $2 for it, and I think as we got into this year, as I kind of saw the response to this case study, I kind of amped that up to a $3 sign. So
awesome.
So yeah, I mean, it's still ongoing. Like, I think every now and then my swipe file is still getting filled with ideas, to really elevate this particular story, this particular customer. And, it's amazing because, it does great stuff for them too. Like, we want more people to know all the amazing things they're doing and what their mission is, because it's amazing. So yeah, I think, maybe $4 in the future. We'll see.
It's good to stay conservative in the beginning, and see where it goes.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love it. Well, I think it's time for the lightning round. What do you say, Mike?
Go for it.
Let's do it. All right. Ready for the lightning round, Winona?
I think so.
Okay. All right. I've got a series of questions and then at the end. So nothing that you need to prepare for ahead of time, just whatever comes to mind. First question is, what is the main KPI you use to evaluate marketing success?
Main KPI. Yeah, that's a big one. Main KPI. I think I've mentioned this before, but the high intent conversations is something that really, really pops up a lot, like in our marketing team. I think that's something that it's easy for us to measure at this point as well. As a smaller team and as our company is starting to grow. So I would say that that's a great measure for the work that we're trying to do in terms of creating these stories and stuff like that.
High intent conversation. I love that. What's something new you're looking forward to testing out this year?
Yeah. So can't spill all the details yet, but I guess you could keep a lookout. So I'm really trying to experiment with a lot more journalistic content, some novelty content here and there that are really, experimenting with different formats on the blog, really trying to build a little bit more of a media approach, which will be interesting for our niche. Just trying to see how that goes. Have a lot of cool projects stored up that I'm trying to dive into.
Cool. What's a marketing best practice that you actually wish would disappear?
Ooh, that's a big question. It's a very big question. I mean, I don't know. Okay, I'm not gonna outright say that I wish it would disappear. I think it's a very common kind of statement. I think it's just an best practice that needs to be approached with caution. So it's the whole gating content thing. I think there's a time and place for sure, but I've definitely been in a position where a lot of my content has been kind of stifled because of the form.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of content doesn't reach its true potential because of the form and where we're at today. So I think, I don't want it to disappear because I know there are companies that, there's a time and place, but I think it needs to be approached with more caution. And I think the form isn't always the right answer. I think that's a good way to put it.
I like that answer. And I think one skill set that you have that you didn't share is just how diplomatic you are in your approach to content. That's a really valuable skill to have, is to be a diplomat in terms of how you approach different things. So there's another skill to add to your list. What is your least favorite business word or phrase?
Oh, I don't know if it's a business phrase in particular. It's a phrase that I've gotten a lot in previous experiences. I was just talking about this with my manager a couple hours ago too, but it's just a very vague statement. It's, take your campaign to the next level. I think it's one of those things where it's like what is the next level? Can you give me a little bit more insight on what I can do? It's kind of like how designers don't like hearing, make it pop, right? I think it's the same thing. Next level. Not a phrase I like to hear very often.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I often talk to our designer can you make this bolder? Can you make this, and I'm like, oh God, I'm doing the thing that I shouldn't be doing.
I used to do the same thing too. Yeah. I learned it the hard way. I got I got a little stare and I was like, I'm so sorry.
I know it is true. That is very vague feedback to a creative and to a writer. Is okay, what does that?
Yeah.
All right, next question here. What is your favorite business or marketing book?
Oh yeah, my favorite book, Framework. You can search that up on Amazon. It's a really great book. I think for me, it really opened my eyes on. It's like a whole matrix of creating ideas, generating ideas, and it's not just typical long form blog ideas. It goes from infographics to data tables to research reports. It's a really awesome book that I always keep on my work desktop, kind of that file. I've kind of broken that book but when I'm lost at all points, I kind of pull it up, and I know exactly what to do and how to think about a problem.
Awesome. All right, bonus questions. Favorite song or playlist to listen to at work?
Ooh, at work. Now I don't know if I forgot the name of the playlist specifically. But I have, so I've created a playlist called Fresh Pages on my Spotify. Compilation of different lo-fi music, but I specifically like lo-fi music that can be played in a Tokyo cafe. That's what I search on Spotify, Tokyo cafe.
Okay.
So yeah, I've compiled a lot of that into my own little playlists, and kind of jazzy, very light lo-fi music. That really helps me get into deep work.
I like that. I tend to listen to a lot of bossa nova music, and then also new age bossa nova, which is kind of lo-fi and more like Parisian cafe, not exactly Tokyo cafe, but
I'll make note of that. I need more songs for my playlist. Anyways.
For your playlist, awesome. What is something your LinkedIn network doesn't know about you just yet?
Ooh, just yet. I don't know if I'll post about it on LinkedIn even, but it's very basic, but I think to anyone who knows me, I think I've kept it under the wraps, but I am a big plant mom now, a very big plant mom. And I think it's kind of informed my whole entire life philosophy, even how I approach content and things like that. I'm very careful and very a lot more process driven, just because I have all these plants that I'm trying to keep alive at the moment. And it's surprising, just because I've always said no to plants, because they've always died in my hand. Ever since the past 1 year, I suddenly got a bunch of green fingers, and all my plants are alive. So yeah, that's something, maybe in a couple months I might have so many that I will start posting about it on LinkedIn.
I mean, that was a huge trend during the pandemic. I think
Right.
there was, I can't remember, it was either Trends, I think, that posted about it, that the Trends
I got
newsletter or
into
whatever.
it after because when it started, I was like, oh, I will never be able to do this. And then when things opened up, I was like, I kind of want to stay at home. I should get a plant. It's snowballed.
That is funny. Well, we'll have to exchange plant notes. I am also a low-key plant mom. We just moved cross country, so unfortunately I could not bring all my plants with me. I had to rehome them. But I did just buy all new plants, and I almost killed one of them. But I learned how to take care of it. It was a new plant for me, one that I had never taken care of before. So we'll exchange some notes.
Yeah.
And I read on your bio that you are a published novelist, or you're working on a novel. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm a published fiction author. So it's funny because I write a lot in my day-to-day, right? And so when I'm not writing for work, I go complete fiction, since so the year I graduated college, I ticked off something on my bucket list and I published a fiction novel, and it's out on Amazon. I would love to have time to write a second book. Don't really have that at the moment, but it's definitely something up there. So yeah, that's something that's very displayed on my LinkedIn, or else I would have put that as the answer for the last.
What's the name of your book, and what is it about?
Yeah, so my book is called I'm Chasing Myself. So I wrote this toward the end of my college years. So it's really a book talking about finding yourself when you're in that youth kind of stage. I'm from Malaysia originally. I moved here for school, and now I've sort of uprooted my life and I'm here for the long haul. So I think there's a lot of homesickness, loneliness kind of involved in that big transition. So I wrote a little bit about that, and really focused on kind of tying that into a more fiction setting that kind of described Malaysia a little bit and the kind of environments that I grew up with.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Winona, thank you so much for joining us on the Master Marketer Show. If our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm not as active on Twitter, but you can find me on Twitter. I do read tweets. I'm trying to be a little bit more active. So yeah, those two would be the best.
Awesome. And if anyone wants to purchase your book, they can do so on Amazon, right?
Yes. Yes.
And it's called
we'll include a link.
Finding Myself or Chasing Myself. I'm Chasing Myself. Awesome. Winona, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show. I learned so much about the world of content marketing that has changed so dramatically, especially over the past couple of years. And you're a shining example of content marketing and content marketers doing it the right way. So thank you for sharing your mindset, skill sets, and tool sets with us.
Thank you for having me. This was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Master Marketer Show. We'll be back next week with more B2B marketing success stories. Visit our website, www.proofpoint.marketing, for the full episode library, complete with show notes, guides, templates, and more. Make sure to follow Proofpoint Marketing on LinkedIn and YouTube so you never miss an episode. Listen every Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.